All right, peace and blessings. This is Kimon Freeman, representing We Act Rail, broadcasting live from the halls of the banks of the Anacostia River into the halls of justice and all the injustice, as you would say.
All right, peace and blessings. This is Kimon
and
Freeman,
let me mute my broadcast
We Act Rail,
here.
broadcasting live.
Sorry about that.
From the halls of
All right. So here we go. We are here to discuss MLK Day and his housing positions as we are entering the final stages of a housing crisis, not only in the nation's capital, but around this country. We wanted to make sure that people understand that the greatest power is convincing people that they don't have any, and that the last act of Martin Luther King was the Poor People's Campaign. And one of his tenements of the Poor People's Campaign was his concern over housing, fair housing. And they came to the Capitol. There was the original Occupy movement where they camped out on the National Mall after his government assassination. And so we're here to put some paint to the ink and talk more about the unfinished work of King and the people who are actually standing up to the same injustices that King was addressing. But before we go any further, I wanted to share a quote from Milton Friedman, who was not an ally of the progressive movement, but even a broke clock is right 2 times a day. So I never want to miss an opportunity to share this because I think he speaks truth to power right here, right now. Historically, crises such as the pandemic, has put capitalism on trial right now, and hence exacerbated the housing crisis and other things as well, has really benefited those in power. Usually they take crisis to their benefit. In fact, the Secretary of Education after Hurricane Katrina and when the levees were deliberately destroyed and broke in New Orleans, he said that Katrina was the best thing that happened to New Orleans educational system. Why? Because it destroyed the public education system in the city of New Orleans, and every single school district in New Orleans is now under the power of charter schools. All right, and this is the Secretary of Education. I believe his name was R.E. Duncan at the time. So I just want to put a Democrat, mind you. So I want to put that out there. But this time, at this point in history, I think is actually the opposite. I think this is a crisis that's created opportunities for the people. As I like to say that the pandemic was the first time that poor people got a vacation. But now they want them to even pay for the vacation that they got. And we're here to address all that. Having said all that, Milton Friedman, again, no friend of the progressive movement, went on to say that only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are laying around. That, I believe, is our basic function, to develop alternatives to existing policies, to keep them alive and available until the politically impossible becomes the politically inevitable. And what do I mean about that? Whenever we hear people say that, oh, I can't wait till this is all over and we can get back to normal. Hold up. Normal wasn't working for everybody, okay? There was a housing crisis before all of this. And now that things have changed, we can no longer make decisions based upon what things used to be. We need to be forward thinking. We need to be aggressive in our agenda. We need to be progressive in our demands. And we need to understand that the greatest power is convincing people we don't have any. And we do have. All right. Now, the last thing I want to share is words from Martin Luther King before we get started with our program. Martin Luther King, the radical Martin Luther King, the one that made more than 2 speeches, said that one day we must ask the question, why are there 40 million poor people living in America? And when you ask that question, you are raising questions about the economic system, about a broader distribution of wealth. When you ask that question, you begin to question the capitalistic economy. And I'm simply saying that more and more, we've got to begin to ask questions about the whole society. And that crisis has put us at the crux of this moment, because many of us are familiar with Martin Luther King's last speech, but we're not as familiar with his next to his last speech, which was delivered right here in Washington, D.C., March 31st, 1968. And he went on to say, it was entitled Remaining Awake During a Great Revolution, where he went on to say that far too often people find themselves living in periods of great social change, but yet they fail to develop the new ideas, the new mental responses that the new situation demands. They end up sleeping through a revolution. Okay, so we have a few people from the Stay DC program, because that was the program when we said cancel rent. The government responded with a Stay DC program, for those who are unfamiliar, that required both the building owner, because we do not give power to landlords. No one's a lord of the land here. They're the building owner or the building manager. All right, do not continue to use the terminology of our oppressors. We're changing the day, changing the conversation, and definitely changing the vocabulary. But the building owner will have to apply, the tenant will have to apply, and then the government will approve it, thumbs up or thumbs down. So we have a few people who have gone through that process, myself included. And we also have a representative that is here advocating on their behalf. But before we get started with that panel, I wanted to introduce a good friend of mine, my brother, Salim Adolfo, who is ANC commissioner that encompasses the area of Washington, D.C. at the intersection of Malcolm X Avenue and Martin Luther King Avenue. And with all of that said, I'd like to turn the floor over to my good brother, Salim. Salim, the floor is yours.
Greetings, everyone. I want to say happy MLK Day to everybody. And in the spirit of We Act Radio and Kimon, I would encourage everybody to pick up the FBI files on Martin Luther King and look at the documents that are in those files where they talked about preventing the rise of a Black Messiah who could electrify and unify the masses, especially amongst our young people. And the reason why I want to highlight that was when Kimon told me we need to cancel the rent. I have to admit, I was like, this Negro crazy. These folks ain't canceling no rent, right? But the movement to push our government to come up with something was definitely done by a lot of young activists that was able to reimagine what a new world could be. Because like Kimon said, we weren't going back to that old world. And so I want to thank people like Kimon and all of the people who will never be written in the books of history, who, through the cancel rent movement, who got us to this space. And my experience with the Stay DC program is two-pronged. As someone who helped residents navigate this space, also as someone who works, with government and in government as an advisory neighborhood commissioner to help get these resources to people. And what I saw was a lot of gaps. And it's a good idea. It's a good notion. It's a good concept. But we have people that are across the spectrum in a variety of different ways, in terms of some who are technologically savvy, who keep good records. And then you got some who aren't as good in some of those spaces. And what I think one of the shortcomings of the program is, it's like, hey, just go to this website and fill this out. And that sounds good for people who have those technological capabilities. But we have a lot of elders who aren't on Twitter, who aren't on Facebook, who aren't on Instagram, who didn't even know that these programs existed. And then it's like, you need to upload all of these different documents from over the past few years. And yes, we should keep better records, but the truth is we don't. And in the middle of a pandemic, I don't want to say people were penalized, but it's like, if you don't have them, you don't have them, but that doesn't mean you still don't deserve a place to stay. So if there could have been some ways that we could have tried to navigate that space to help people who may not have that documentation or who may not have the technological capabilities. And I know living here in Ward 8, my Wi-Fi isn't always the best, right? So there's great program, but actual ability to implement it for all residents equally was a challenge. So I know I worked with the Attorney General Carl Racine's office, and we solicited a lot of folks to come and volunteer to help out. But if you weren't on a distribution list already, or you weren't on social media already, you may have not known about that. We went door to door, knocking on doors, and who can really want to come to the door in the middle of a pandemic? So I think there was just a lot of gaps. So in the event that something of this magnitude was to happen again, I would say that the city needs to do a better job with its outreach in terms of just doing direct communication. The same way you could take over the airwaves or the media waves to send these text message and alerts, we could have done the Stay DC program information possibly that way. Or I've always watched my favorite program on Saturdays, which was Kung Fu Flicks, Kid with the Golden Arms, or The Mystery of Shadow Boxing. And then all of a sudden, boom, this is an alert from the emergency broadcast system. We could have had an alert like that for the Stay DC program, right? We have to think of innovative and creative ways to reach people who aren't in the technological world, who've chosen not to be part of the metaverse, right? So those folks are as equally as important. I think that was the big gap to where I saw with the Stay DC program. And then once people filed, like Himo said, what if what if the property owner didn't file, right? What if the people who manage this property weren't really interested in being a part of this program? Then we got a dilemma, because a lot of people I know said, well, I did all of the things that I was supposed to do, but now I'm still waiting. And unfortunately, I was not in a space to where I can help them, because I don't have the ability to look in on the back end of some of those things. And we weren't even told who we can call to try to, help people navigate some of these things. So we understand that when you're trying to provide resources to literally hundreds of thousands of people, there are going to be some gaps. There are going to be a lot of successes, but there are going to be some folks who aren't able to navigate that space, and we can't just leave them out there and be like, oh well. And so I definitely want to say, with the people that I worked with, they did not leave people in that space dangling, but I do know that there were some that were there. And so we got to figure out ways to make sure that we take care of as many people as we can. And even the people who aren't able to always articulate what their needs are still need help. And we got to be able to get folks who have the soft skills that know how to communicate with those. And that's where I think we should do a lot of extra training at, in government, is helping people learn how to ask the right questions sometimes, because people need help, but they just don't know how to articulate their problem, especially when this is a new program that nobody ever really heard of. So I want to thank everybody for the opportunity to be here to share my experience. I do think that the Stay DC program was definitely something good. Hopefully we got the word that I heard is that in the DCS that there's a few more millions of dollars that have come in to help people who still need this. But I would encourage everybody to look at the emergency rental assistance program that I know that United Planning Organization has, if you were not able to get into the Stay DC program. And I know that there's still some opportunities through mutual aid where folks can get some kind of assistance, if necessary. And I love to stay connected with everybody. So you can follow me on any social media platform. It's just type in my name and I'll pop up. And I'm still on MySpace. I'm Brother Salim on MySpace. So if you got a MySpace page, you can
say
hit me
MySpace.
Yeah. And if you still use Black Planet, I'm there. I don't have my password. I can't log in, but you can check me out there too. And so as I'm on my way out, I would definitely encourage folks, build your library, read a book. A good album to always listen to is anything by Bob Marley, but Uprising. We got to find some different creative ways to educate our folks. And on that note, get you a copy of The Spook Who Sat by the Door. Rest in peace, Sam Greenlee. All right, I'm out.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, brothers and sisters, friends and enemies, that was Salim Adufu, ANC commissioner. All right, I can't believe he said MySpace, but Drake was discovered on MySpace, so we give him a little shout out. All right, want to give you another quote for MLK, so we start this program and have the people starting to speak for themselves. Martin Luther King went on to say on May of 1967 that we must recognize that we can't solve our problem now until there is a radical redistribution of economic and political power. This means a revolution of values and other things. We must see now that the evils of racism, economic exploitation, and militarism are all tied together. You can't really get rid of one without getting rid of the other. The whole structure of American life must be changed. America is a hypocritical nation, and we must put our own house in order. And I would urge people to go check out, it's sad to say this, because our corporate media, 6 corporations control most of what we see here and read. That's why We Act Radio exists in the nation's capital, to amplify the voices of the people and do battle in the arena of the media. But far too often, our comedians actually have more truth telling in their content than the actual news outlets, especially when that truth telling is contradictory of the power structure and the establishment. And the brother Trevor Noah on Daily News has a segment called "If You Don't Know, Now You Know." He did one just a few days ago on housing. And did you know that Wall Street, the same ones that was bailed out during the Obama administration that caused the housing crisis, where a disproportionate amount of people of color, particularly Black people, lost their housing, okay? Wall Street is buying up a lot of the houses and renting it. And by them buying up houses, they're exacerbating the housing crisis. And now people are lining up to get houses. Okay, I want to put that out there. People need to understand that we're at the crux of a revolution right now. Now, having said all that, we want to turn this over to the people. And thank everyone who is joining us on this live stream on YouTube. You can put your chats on the YouTube, questions and comments. We will get to you at the end of the program. But the person that I want to bring on is an advocate for the people that's been represented here today. Her name is Tara Vasefi. And I hope I got it right. Thumbs up, thumbs down. All right. And she was a volunteer moderator with the DC Mutual Aid Network and an attorney specialized in digital evidence. Welcome to We Act Radio. Back to We Act Radio. Tara. Miss Tara.
Kimon, I'd love to share my screen if you want to make me a host.
And here we go. And we're going to make that happen for you right now. Hopefully that does not affect our live stream. Boom.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Sweet. Okay, so yes, we're still live on YouTube, and here is my screen. I just want to quickly, I'm really eager to hear from everyone about their firsthand experiences. I just wanted to share why this came to my attention. I am a moderator with the DC Mutual Aid Network Facebook page, a volunteer moderator, and I started seeing posts about how difficult it was for people to be able to use, just like what Salim was talking about how difficult it was to get into this program. And then over the months, I kind of tracked and I started tagging you, actually, well, React Radio, when I started seeing posts that were just, completely kind of showed what's so terrible about this racist system that we've come to rely on. Here's one that really stood out. Well, this is why I don't rely on assistance. Thanks to DC Stay not coming through, I'll owe rent and late. Salim was talking about for the next 3 to 4 months. This last half year has been a struggle. The pandemic wiped all of my savings. I've never struggled this much in my adult life before, so on and so forth. And so I just kept seeing posts about how problematic this program was. And to be honest, to the extent that I knew anyone who got the money that they thought they were owed, I'm just speaking anecdotally from my own experience, they're all white men. And because I'm someone who worked in the tech industry, I've actually been unemployed since COVID because I spoke out against some unethical practices at the tech company I was working at. And I decided not to apply for Stay DC because I know that there are people who are in a much more precarious position than me, especially with children and these kinds of things. And so I decided not to apply for it, but I kept track of what was going on with the program. And LaQuisha here, who's going to be speaking soon, her and I connected through the DC Mutual Aid Network. Both of us are very active in this ancient practice of mutual aid, especially in the Black community in DC. We have a very rich history here of how neighbors banded together to be able to put up a fight against this oppressive system. But basically what we have started building out is this list of questions that we have to really understand what's going on with this program. And the most important thing to me is it just seems so backwards that they're putting the system is putting so much pressure on the people who are literally in the most vulnerable position. They're the ones who are at risk of losing their homes. So to send them through this bureaucratic mess to get I'm going to call them landlords, but lords with a capital L, to make fun of how ridiculous it is that we think that these people, that we need to work and give our bodies for their passive income. in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of a state of emergency, and with all these other things that are going on, record inflation. That's why we're seeing all these supply chain issues and the empty shelves, record violent crime in our area, record homelessness in our area. And so I just want to say, flip this system upside down. If there's $352 million allocated for this, and so far half of that has been distributed, it should be up to the landlords, the building managers, whatever you want to call them. They're the ones who are benefiting from this. The people who are doing all the work, all the administrative work to be able to get this money to the lords, are not in the best position to be, bringing this money to where it's designated. So why is the system set up so inefficiently and causing so much stress to people who are already in such a vulnerable position? So if there's time, I'd love to go over this list of questions. There's this, weird letter that I received about this, how to, fight if your services, or you've been evicted, or if your services have been disconnected, your utility services. So basically, this is what the do something part, as inspired by We Act Radio, the do something part of this Stay DC Town Hall is, let's get our questions answered, and let's try to build up a case for why we should not, the tenants should not be the ones to try to work and have all this stress and have all this threat of late fees and evictions over our heads. When the money is there, get the money to the landlords or the building managers. They're the ones who should be doing all the administrative work to get the money, and they can fight amongst themselves to get a slice of this $352 million and $165 million that's still left to be distributed, even though Stay DC is not accepting applications any longer. And the other thing that Salim mentioned, that there's this ERAP program, and I know that we are going to hear from the participants today about how ERAP has been equally problematic, and I would say violent. Kimon, this is what's going on. What I've seen over and over again is actually violent, because it's putting so much pressure and so much stress on the people who are in the worst position to be able to absorb this system's failures. Thank you.
All right, and that was Ms. Tara Fasefi, volunteer moderator with the DC Mutual Aid Network and attorney specialized in digital evidence. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for your do something. But we do reject the term landlord. There's no lord over us. This is not feudal Europe. No one is lord over you. And once you start changing the conversation and the dialogue, you'll start changing your thought patterns, and that'll start changing your behavior. You won't feel subservient to a system and feel disempowered that you are not able to do something. Because as Alice Walker says, the Pulitzer Prize winner Alice Walker said that the greatest power is convincing people they don't have any. But one thing I want our listening audience to walk away with is that she pointed out that the Stay DC program, which was created in response to the council rent demands nationwide, was allocated $352 million. And the last report, they have actually distributed less than $166 million, which is less than half. But at the same time, people are being applications are being rejected, and that's why we're here to talk to some people who have gone through this process. And I think that personally, that anyone who has been approved for ERAP at any point in time in the past, say, 5 years, should have automatically been qualified for the State DC program if the applicant will have to be involved with the process at all. Because I feel that it should just been straight between the building owners and the government. Then they should have taken care of that and left the workload off of the people who have been diametrically opposed by this, affected by this rather. So having said that, first up, we want to bring Ms. Vivian Mercer in, and Vivian Mercer has applied for the Stay DC program. Please introduce yourself. Welcome to We Act Radio, and I'll just ask a few questions after we share your story with our listening audience.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone. My name is Vivian Mercer, and I am a Ward 8 resident. And I wanted to mention that I applied for the state DC program in September of this year. And I had filled out all of the information except when they got to the point of asking for my last 3 years bank statements. And I wanted to know what did that have to do with me getting funds for the state DC program. So I chose not to do that with the landlord. So I applied again with United Planning Organization for assistance with my utilities. And that application was accepted. And I haven't heard anything back from them yet. But when I did call back, I think it was December 7th, they told me that my application was in the 3rd stage, whatever that means. But bottom line is I haven't gotten any assistance with my utilities, and I don't know what my position is now with my application.
Are you been harassed with phone calls for collection?
No, the bill just keeps going up, and I pay a little bit, whatever I can get, $25, $30 when I send them a note, letting them know I'm not working, but I'm sending something towards the bill. So. But it's
Now,
like $200 and $300 for utilities.
Now, may I ask you, did you, Ms. Vivian, did you ever apply for ERAP program?
No.
Emergency Rental Assistance Program here in Washington, D.C.?
No.
Okay.
I applied for Lockheed. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. From a journalist standpoint, I have to acknowledge that 3 months of bank statements is a prerequisite to apply for emergency rental assistance program. I do agree that in a state of emergency, that the onus of that process shouldn't be put upon those who suffer the most. And I think that it should be a different process for the state DC versus ERAP. ERAP was a program that existed during the housing crisis that existed before COVID, before this crisis, before this pandemic. And State DC is a new program created as a result of this crisis and a result of this pandemic. And I think that it should be a different tier application process. So I just want to acknowledge that from a journalistic standpoint. But so you're not behind in your rent, you're only behind in your utilities? Is that what I'm to understand?
Yes, yes.
Okay. There was another issue that we spoke of about off camera. I want to make sure that we hit all of your points. Is there any other points that you want to make? Because I'm at a loss of what the other issue that you had mentioned before.
Well, I wanted to know, why did the state DC program need 3 years of my bank statements when—
Oh, excuse me, you said years?
3 years, yes.
Oh, wow. That was that great. I feel better. That is completely preposterous. Let me put on my whiteboard hat. That is completely preposterous. They require a couple of months for the emergency rental assistance program. A couple of months.
No.
You just said 3 years. Oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God. So we look, this is a roundtable conversation. So we got your gist, and now you can jump in at any point, but I want to get everyone to make their opening statement, and we're going to have a communal roundtable discussion. Okay. And thank you so much. And I should have said this at the onset. First, I should have said this at the onset, and I apologize to all of our guests that's up here, because from 10 years of doing independent media, I can attest to you that far too often that the people who have the problem are the people who are least likely willing to come on to address the problem. So therefore, the people that create the problems are the ones you see in the media and you read about in the paper, because the people who are dealing with the problem are intimidated to speak up for themselves. So I need to take my hat off to all the sisters, and that's unfortunately just sisters up here. The strongest, Black women, the only reason we still made it was because of Black women. Thank y'all. But we want to thank each and every one of y'all for standing up today to speak out, because no one's more qualified than you to tell your story. And one of the things that we are challenging right here today is having other people speak for us. You know, Ms. Tara is advocating for you, but she made sure that your voices were included in this conversation. This was just me and her talking about the problem. We brought people in that was dealing with the problem. And I'm with you, ladies. You know, I've applied for the state DC program myself, and I'm still under review. They asked me for more information and yada, yada, yada. And I think, again, that if you have been approved for an ERAP in the past 5 years, should have been automatically approved for state DC. So having said all that, I want to go to the next person in line. And again, we will be having a roundtable discussion. I want to bring into the conversation Ms. LaQuisha. Ms. LaQuisha, you still with us? I hope she's still there. Ms. LaQuisha.
I wanted to point out something about the LIHEAP program, but I will wait.
Okay, we'll be right with you, Ms. Vivian. And
Okay.
hopefully LaQuisha will be joining us shortly. Ms. Tracy Joyner, are you ready to go? Make sure you unmute yourself and your camera is on.
All right. In my situation,
Introduce yourself, Ms. Tracy. Introduce yourself.
Okay, I'm sorry. My name is Tracy Joyner, and I'm a Ward 8 resident as well.
Thank you.
In my situation, I had my grandson living with me, so my income was TANF. I'm not in the best of health. And as the pandemic came, by him having a summer job and me having so many underlying conditions, he had to move back home with his mother, which took away the income. So I ended up being a couple of months behind, and I applied. It's been months, and I mean, this is since like early June that I applied. And so after months went by that I didn't hear anything, I started calling. But I did notice that anyone that I spoke to had no information for me. They couldn't tell me anything. So after that, a few months more went by, and I finally got a call from a gentleman asking me for pay stubs. And I explained to him that there were no pay stubs. I sent in the paperwork showing that my income terminated due to my grandson leaving the house and me having underlying conditions. And he told me, oh, well, somebody will get right back to you. More months went by, and I feel like it's just a computer kicking out responses, because every time I get an in review notice, it's late at night in my email. And I know that State DC is not even open at those hours. So
I think some of those are automated. I think some of those are automated emails, and I can attest to receiving some of those as well. I just want to chime in that I'm also sorry to hear that you're not at best of health, because you look so beautiful, but I'm sorry that you're not in the best of health right now. Now, what has been your biggest frustration with the State DC application process? And also, is your building owner or building management pressing you for any payments?
No, they're not. Actually, the lady at the office, she applied with me.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the reason that they're not really pressing me right now. But it's like I said, those in review notices, I've never gotten one during business hours. It's always late night. So I just kind of feel like they just have some, a machine kicking out some notices. For it to be such a high profile program, makes me wonder who's doing what, who's running it, you don't know anything. All you know is that they ask you for some paperwork, you send it, and nothing is being done. I never applied for any rental assistance in DC before. This is the first time, but I understand the process and know how to work the technical part of it. It's just I'm not understanding how they can say that my situation is not COVID, not due to COVID.
Okay. Now, Ms. Vivian, I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, we look like our other panelist, LaQuisha, screen is frozen. This is part of the problem in terms of the wealth distribution in the nation's capital, because we also have a digital divide. She may not have access to quality internet connection as other people take for granted. Even Ted Leonis, the owner of the Washington Wizards, the owner of the Washington Mystics, and the owner of the I don't even know the name of the hockey team, but he said that the digital divide in the nation's capital is as dire as the Flint water crisis. You know, so I want to make sure that we acknowledge that we're talking about disparities of wealth, and that's why I was invoking Martin Luther King today, and wanted to have this on MLK Day, because we say MLK, but we don't understand all that that man represented and what comes with it. So I want everyone on this call, with the panelists involved, who was brave enough to speak up for themselves, know that they got backup. Know that Martin Luther King agreed with your position, that he was advocating for your position, that he was representing your position. So you're not in this alone. All right, you're not in this alone. And I want you to know that you stand on the shoulders of great people. And that's why he was forcibly removed from the platform. All right, I want to make sure you understand that. But Ms. Vivian, hopefully we have LaQuisha to join us. And we had another panelist with some beautiful children in her background that's no longer in the queue, and we're missing her as well. But Ms. Vivian, you said you had another point that you wanted to make. Please unmute yourself.
Yes, I also wanted to point out that before I applied for the state DC program, I had applied for LAHEAP, in which I had an appointment.
I'm sorry, could you tell us what that is?
That's the LAHEAP. This is where they help you with your water and electricity and stuff like that. I can't think of the name of it right now, but it's one of the government programs where they help you with your utilities. But I had an appointment where I had to wait like 3 months in advance. And when the pandemic came, I wasn't able to keep my appointment. So they told me to go online to fill out the application, which I did. And I had uploaded all of my information except one document, which I didn't have. And the application would not go through. And I thought that was crazy, because it took me almost an hour or so to do this application. And because of that one thing, the entire application didn't go through. So, and now they won't see you. You can't make an appointment. So I'm just stuck. I don't know what to do.
And who have you talked to in reference to this issue being addressed?
I've called the 311 mayor's hotline and spoke to someone about my appointment with the LAHEAP program, and they keep telling me, well, you have to go online and fill out the application. And I think the application has a glitch, as I said.
God forbid for those, again, like LaQuisha and others who will have an internet connection issues. How could they possibly navigate this process? How can they possibly navigate this world if you don't have access to the internet? You know, and people need to understand that it's not just access to the internet, the cost of your service provider, but you need to have a computer, right? You need to have a desktop or a laptop or a smartphone or iPhone. And we guys know what the costs of these iPhones are. Some of these people in the poorest sections of the nation's capital are still analog, right? And their best connection to the internet is going to the library. All right. So we need to understand that, and where the rubber meets the road. And that's why I keep evoking Martin Luther King when he's talking about the Poor People's Campaign, the redistribution of wealth and all these issues, because they make blanket statements and it sounds good. Oh, we're going to put up $352 million for the Stay DC program to ensure people get to stay in place, right? But the real story is we've only allocated less than half of those funds to the actual people that need it. So we only done less than half of what we was promised to do. All right. And in the midst of that, we've actually denied, and if in many cases, denied from people from any funds requested at all, denied their application outright and completely, or we have allocated less than what they requested, which means less than what they actually needed, and therefore they're still in threat of eviction, or they're still in threat of having their utilities cut off. And I want to bring Tracy back in. Tracy, do you have any disagreement with anything I've said, and do you have any problems that you have not addressed that you still want to point out that you have occurred during this process of your applications?
Actually, what I was wondering is are they going to put in place like where you can actually speak with someone that knows about your case? That's what I'm wondering. If that's something they're going to do, or is it going to be like a blanket denial and then you just deal with that?
Well, again, I don't like saying and playing the devil's advocate, but as from a journalist standpoint, and that's why I applied for this. I wanted to make sure that I participated in the State DC program, so I understand what was going on in the State DC program. So I waited to the last tier to apply, because I wanted people that was in much more dire straits to apply. Because even though I'm behind, I got friends and folks that could loan me money, if shit hit the fan. But I shouldn't have to go into debt because there was a pandemic. I shouldn't have to go into debt behind all of this. If I lost money in my income, there was a pause in my income, then I should qualify for the State DC program. But I wanted to have those who was much more in a dire situation to apply first, because I felt like I wanted that money to go out to those people first. And so I applied like 2 days before the deadline of the cutoff. But having said all that, in my application process, remember I said that I too got all those, your process and your applications process every couple of weeks. It said it would take about 4 months, and it was about 4 months. And on around the third or fourth month, I get an email saying that they needed more information to verify my income. And so I sent what I had into them. And it was like, we need your tax forms. I'm like, I didn't make enough money to qualify to even file taxes for 2020. So that's why I don't have not to mention I'm a war tax resistant, but that's another conversation. Ms. Tara knows about that a little bit. But having said all this, my point is that I have to say that I called State DC. I got a young man who spoke to me to walk me through, because I was what do you call it? I was locked out of the application portal that they had. I was locked out. And he walked me in to get me back through, answer my questions. It was very helpful, but he could not give me any individual information about my particular case.
Right.
He was helpful in general. So I'm just here to advocate that the fact that State DC has a general capacity to acknowledge calls and applicants, but they do not have a detailed one, which makes me wonder, are they the governing body, or are they merely the people who are gathering the information, who are sending it off to a third party to be examined? Because one of the things that people fail to realize in Washington, D.C. is that it's not the DC Council that's running the show. It's the Federal City Council that's running the show. And what is the Federal City Council? The Federal City Council is the local version of ALEX. And for those who do not know, ALEX is the American Legislative Exchange Council. On a national level, ALEX has corporations, heads of corporations, and heads of senators and state governments. So you have politicians and you have corporations meeting to create agendas legislatively. So when you heard about Trayvon Martin and Stand Your Ground laws, that was legislation that was created out of ALEX, where you have government agencies and corporations meeting to determine what is going to be the agenda legislatively. They create the laws, and then they just come in and put a vote. By the time it gets to us and it's up to vote, it's already been decided. It's a rubber stamp, of course, unless there's some outrage on it. But the corporations that fund that type of thing, just to give you an example, is like Walmart. Did you know that Walmart is the largest seller of guns in America? Walmart is the biggest gun dealer in America. Walmart sells more guns than anyone else in America. Okay, we got it twisted in DC because we don't see guns in Walmart, but in every other Walmart, there are guns. You know, there was a guy in Ohio, I think his name John Crawford, who was shot in Walmart, and he didn't even have a real gun. I think it was a tool gun. Now, people want to know, well, why are we talking about Walmart and American Legislative Exchange Council and the Federal City Council in a conversation about State DC? Because it's MLK Day. And he said injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And there is a connectiveness to all of these issues. So if we are true and are accurate in our suspicion that State DC is not the governing body, which means State DC is not the determining body over who's approved and who's not, if there's a third party that, and it looks that way from all intents and purposes, then who is that third body? And if there is a third body, I submit to you, it would be as a result of the Federal City Council. And so we have there's a slippery slope here. This begets a longer conversation, but we have 10 minutes left in the program, and I want to turn it over to our brave panelists that's joining us here today. And I'm so sorry that LaQuisha's internet connectivity wasn't up to par to have her join us, and for all those that she represents to have that same problem. Ms. Vivian,
I just real quickly, I just wanted to let you know what the LIHEAP program stands for. I looked it up. So it's under the umbrella of DOEE, which is the Department of Energy and Environment. And the LIHEAP program assists income eligible district household with heating and cooling energy through the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program. That's what LIHEAP stands for.
Thank you, Ms. Vivian. Thank you, Ms. Vivian. And being the true advocate that she is, Ms. Tara wants to share some information on Ms. LaQuisha's situation. Ms. Tara, the floor is yours.
Yes, I don't really see myself as an advocate in this situation because, like I said, LaQuisha was the one who really told me everything that I know about State DC from a firsthand perspective. And I just want to make sure that this goes on the record because her situation is particularly mind-boggling because basically she was dealing with unemployment for a good chunk of the pandemic. And then when she finally got a job, then that's when her rent increased because her income increased. And before she really had time to make the money to be able to make up that rent, that's the reason that she was, kind of pushed behind in paying the rent. And then on top of that, she didn't qualify. She didn't qualify for a huge amount of State DC. It was just a portion. And then they told her you should apply for ERAP to make up the difference. And when she went through her case manager to apply for the difference, that's when they told her that she didn't qualify for ERAP because she already got some money from State DC. And the website itself on State DC says that if this is insufficient, then you should apply for ERAP. And Salim says it. You've been saying it. Everyone is. So it's just, again, another example of how ridiculous this administrative process is, that it puts so much pressure on someone who, she's someone who never was behind on rent. She actually was always, before the pandemic, she was working in a nursing home and she had no problem paying full rent, taking care of herself and her two children. And it's just so devastating that there's this money that's set aside for this purpose. And everyone at the bottom is scrambling to figure out how to get it to its destination, which isn't even for them. It's for these, these oppressive property owners. And now she's getting, this is really personal. I wish she was here, but I would like to make it on the record that she's actually having to pay back little bits of money that she could be spending on her children, feeding herself. And she's getting so much pressure from her leasing office that she feels like she needs to take that money from her children's mouths and pay off little bits of money for her back rent because that's how much pressure that she's under. And this is just happening across. We just hear right here on this town hall, we have 3 different examples of people doing everything they can, 4 different examples, people doing everything they can to pay this money for their passive income of these property managers, these property owners, and doing it at their own expense. And so I just want to also uplift Bayard Rustin, who's another person that, you know, if we're going to be talking about MLK, we need to be talking about him. And he says, the only weapon we have is our bodies, and we need to tuck them into places so the wheels don't turn. So, and I agree with you, Kimon. I think that, I mean, you should say that to the people, and I do want to hear what Tracy has to say, but I would really encourage all of us to just flip this upside down world right side up and stop putting our bodies on the line for the Lord's passive income. We don't have to do that. They're the ones who took the risk to put an investment into property, like these Wall Street people and everyone else, Chinese people and Russians and everyone who's coming to America to use this speculative resource. And so we are not on the line to make sure that they get the return on their investment. They took the risk. They need to figure out how to get the return on their investment. And it's not up to us and our bodies to make sure that that happens.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And for the last word, well, I guess I'm going to be summarizing the program, but Tracy, you got the last word for my panel.
Okay, what I wanted to say is I did put my information in the chat. I don't like bullies. This is definitely a fight I want to jump into. So I want everybody here to keep that in mind. My information is in the chat. I'm not the healthiest person, but like I said, I don't like bullies. I want to fight. And I also have to leave because I have to get my grandchildren ready to go home, but I didn't want to leave without saying thank you.
You are perfectly all right, Miss Tracy. You're perfectly all right. The program's wrapping up right now. I want to thank you so much for coming on. I wish you better health and prosperity. And thank you for joining us today. Thank you for speaking out. Thank you for being a bold representative of the spirit of MLK. And I hope that your grandchildren get an opportunity to watch this interview with you speaking out on their behalf.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
I look forward to meeting you in person. Okay. I just want to make sure that we understand this, that there is a such thing as capacity. And for those who are unfamiliar, who's never been behind in their rent, who's never visited what they call landlord, but what we call, building owners versus tenants court. If you've never been there, never been late behind your rent, the process for you to get a court date to appear because of late rent varies between 1 month and 3 months. 1 month means your landlord is an asshole. It means that your rent is 1 month late, and you've already gotten the earliest court filing that he can make, but generally it's between 1 and 3 months. All right. Now that is for you to get a date. So when you get a date and you show up on that date, you could be anywhere between 2, 3, 4 months behind your rent at the time that you show up for your first court appearance. And at that court appearance, the judge is going to ask you, what's the problem? What's the situation? Try to work out a payment plan, blah, blah, blah. And if you make an agreement with them at that time, you will get at least another 2 months before you come back to court, and you're expected to have, suffice that payment plan, or if you haven't, then you go back to court. So that means you have to make 2 court appearances before they issue an eviction. All right. Now, when people get evicted, they are anywhere between 3 months, 6 months, and beyond behind their rent, depending on the situation. So that is how the system worked under the normal situation before the pandemic. Now, let's apply that to now. We're talking about almost 2 years of backlog on top of that situation I just described to you. So if it's taking anywhere between 3 to 6 months to get evicted under normal circumstances, and then you add on the fact that 1 out of 5 of the renters in the nation's capital were behind their rent, and that you have 2 years of that backlog on top of that, it is beyond the system's capacity to adjudicate all of those cases in a timely manner. All right. I want us to understand that the system is not going to tell you that. I want to make sure everybody feels empowered. And this was especially going out to LaQuisha. And I hope she hears the sound of our voice and you get able to share this YouTube live stream with her. And when she gets access to the internet, she can watch it, because she unequivocally should not be subscribing to the insanity of sacrificing her body and her charge of food off her table. Do I eat? Do I get medicine? Or do I pay this backlog of rent, this debt that I have incurred at no fault of my own? We need to understand this. And all those quotes from Martin Luther King is right on point today. He's speaking to us today, and that's why he was assassinated. And his words are so dangerous that the original quotes on the MLK monument here in Washington, D.C. was edited and sandblasted off because it was just too much for the system to handle. All right. So that's our time, boys and girls, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, and friends and enemies. I want to thank you all for joining us. Let's not be strangers. We could come back. This is the beginning. And Tara, I'm sorry, Tara, there is an action agenda that's following up with this that we didn't touch on. Did you want to speak on that now?
Yeah, I'll just pitch it.
I'll let you wrap it up. Tara, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So yeah, the main thing that we want to do is just get some answers and talk to a real human who actually administers this program. So we were planning, LaQuisha and I were planning on going on Thursday, but I've been exposed to COVID, so I'm not sure if that's going to happen.
Protect yourself at all times.
I'm sorry?
Protect yourself at all times.
Yes, exactly. So I want to quarantine, but I think that the way to do this is really just to go into DHS and start, asking human beings, because that's something that I've learned about this system, is that at the end of the day, it's humans who are administering the system. And when you look them in the eye and you appeal to their humanity, then that's kind of the best way to get the answers that you need. So we're going to try to rally that. Actually, it sounds like Salim is interested in going. It sounds like Miss Tracy is interested in going, maybe Vivian. So the plan is, if we want to, show up with a rapid test and, go into these offices and just stay there until we get our questions answered, then that's kind of, the first step. And then once we get those questions answered, what I've been working on is basically like a standard letter that anyone who's in this position can send to their property managers or property owners, whatever you want to call them, and basically just say, and I ran this by an attorney who I really trust on these matters, and he kind of gave his thumbs up. But essentially the letter is just going to say, listen, I've done everything I can to get you your money, and here's the situation that I'm in. And here's the situation that we're in this area with, unprecedented levels of violent crime, unprecedented levels of homelessness, unprecedented levels of the hospitals right now are overflowing. This is not the time to be getting the most vulnerable amongst us to put their bodies on the line so that the person on top can get their passive income squeezed out of every last dollar. So if you continue to harass me, I'm going to sue you for intentional infliction of emotional distress. That's what I would like to have as a kind of template letter that people can, just kind of arm themselves with, because what you described about, the process of evicting someone, that's definitely, a capacity is definitely something to acknowledge. But we also want to see if we can arm ourselves with some kind of notice, putting the other party on notice that, listen, I'm not the one who's responsible for getting you your return on investment. If you put your money into property investment so that you could accrue some reward, then that's on you. But we're in the middle of a pandemic. We're in a state of emergency. The system is collapsing. The shelves are empty in the grocery stores. I'm not going to take food from my children's mouths and give them to your increasingly bloated millionaire, billionaire bank account.
All right. And there you have it. I want to thank everybody who was joining us today. I want to thank Vivian, Jacqueline, Tara, LaQuisha. Hopefully we can have her back and she can get this program. And Miss Vivian, thank you for being here to tell your story, because no one's more qualified than you to tell your story. And the last word, because it's MLK Day, is MLK himself. He says, I'm now convinced that the simplest approach will prove to be the most effective. The solution to poverty is to abolish it directly by a now widely discussed matter, the guaranteed income. The curse of poverty has no justification in our age. It is socially as cruel and blind as the practice of cannibalism at the dawn of civilization, when men ate each other because they had not yet learned to take food from the soil or to consume the abundant animal life around them. The time has come for us to civilize ourselves by the total, direct, and immediate abolition of poverty. Where do we go from here? That is the last book of Martin Luther King in 1967. And for those who are unaware, Washington, D.C. has one of the greatest disparities of income of any other city in the nation's capital. The nation's capital has the greatest disparity of wealth of any other city in the nation. And the average income of the average white family in Washington, D.C. is 81 times, that's 81 multiples, than the average Black family. And so this is definitely a Black issue, and we need to make sure that we speak truth to power and acknowledge that, because the time has come to address this disparity once and for all. All right. So having said that, thank y'all for joining us. This has been We Act Radio, broadcasting live on the radical side of Martin Luther King Avenue in the underbelly nation's capital, the foothill of Cedar Hill, the line of Anacostia, Freddie Douglass home, the bicentennial. Do something and make sure that you understand that you have the power to challenge the system. And we are living in the midst of a great revolution. Stay woke.
Oh, shoot. Oh.